Our topic for our midweek meditation this evening is the holy and important season of Hallowtide. Not sure what Hallowtide is? Just hang on. We might know the word hallow best from the Lord's Prayer. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. There, the word hallow means keep holy or be holy. But at other points in the English language, it's also served as a noun. Hallow, meaning a holy one or a saint. The category of holy people has been part of Christianity since the beginning, particularly found in Paul's letters and in the Acts of the Apostles. There in Greek, we find references to the hagioi, the holy ones. If you've ever heard of important buildings like the Hagia Sophia, holy. It's often translated hagioi as saints in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Saints were not at that time the dead, they were the community of the living, righteous, faithful. We still find this use in the Apostles' Creed when we say we believe in the communion of saints. It means both those who have gone before us into heaven and those who are still with us here on earth. In the first centuries of the Christian Church, the resulting persecutions of this new religion of Christianity created a category of the faithful who had been killed for their beliefs, also known as the martyrs. Christian communities then told stories, sometimes even legendary mythical ones, about these martyrs, about how they came to be so particularly righteous. These stories were meant to serve as inspiration and as hope for people who were living in deeply troubled times. And remembrances for these martyrs or for other holy dead often took place on the anniversary of their birth or their death, and a collective remembrance would often be practiced in specific geographic communities. So one particular community in one city or part of the country might remember someone who was local to them, who even had grown up in their town, and have celebrations on either their day of birth or their day of their death. This is sometimes referred to as cultic practice, which of course now when we use the word cult to mean something very dangerous and nefarious can sound a little strange, but essentially what it meant, it was an isolated practice to particular areas surrounding one individual person. It's in the 8th century that Pope Gregory sets November the 1st as the date for the Feast of All Saints, where across Christian practice in the Western Christian Church, the Roman Catholic Church, there is one date set aside for a remembrance of all those who have died and gone into heaven. The Western Christian Church, again, until the 1500s, essentially the Roman Catholic Church, started to develop two categories for the word saint. There were dead saints who had become a part of the great cloud of witnesses, and this was essentially all Christians who had died. But then also there were official saints. They had been considered, beatified, and canonized by the church as so overflowing with grace, the grace that was given from God, that through our intercession, they could grant grace back to us. The canonized saints of the Catholic Church don't have power on their own. They're understood to be granted this power by God, and sometimes they're granted power over particular areas of life, like St. Christopher for travelers, or St. Patrick for Ireland, or lost items, St. Anthony. The faithful on earth can pray to a particular saint to intercede for them, and then out of the grace that has been given to that particular saint by God, the faithful may find their prayers answered. The process of beatification and canonization within the Catholic Church has shifted over the 2 millennia in which it has existed, but in particular now, a saint must be someone who has died, and someone who has had miracles attested to them and confirmed that can prove that someone has interceded, has asked this dead person for assistance, and has received it in a way that can be demonstrated to be miraculous. Some stories of the saints are confirmed as historical fact, and others are often based in medieval legends. And because the exact historicity of all the canonized saints cannot be established, there is not an official headcount in Catholicism. The estimate is around 10,000. Over time, the remembrance of the dead that was practiced on All Saints' Day, which is November 1st, was separated into two festivals. There's All Saints, during which the faithful who have reached heaven are remembered, and the following day, November 2nd, is All Souls, where the Church intercedes for those in purgatory, where believers atone for their unforgiven sins before reaching heaven. So on November 1st is the remembrance of those who have reached heaven, and November 2nd is those who have died within the faith, but who are atoning for their sins in purgatory before they reach heaven. The understanding within the Catholic practice is that prayers on November 2nd for those who are still in purgatory can help them atone more quickly and reach heaven. The separation of Christians into these two separate groups of sainthood, the sort of collective saints of all who have died in faith, and then the canonized saints, along with veneration of non-biblical figures and their relics, which came to be looked at as potentially idolatrous worship, and the enormous financial and political power of the Roman Catholic Church, was part of the many questions that Protestant movements growing across Europe had in the 16th century. So Martin Luther and the leaders who followed him in the German Protestant churches argued against the intercession and veneration of saints because, they said, humans cannot be mediators of redemption. Prayers should be directed only to God. Saints can, however, be praised for their demonstration of God's mercy, studied as examples of faith, and imitated for their virtue, according to the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, section 21. For this reason, when the Lutheran Church and other Protestant denominations celebrates All Saints on November 1st, they make no distinction between the saints canonized within the Catholic Church and the beloved grandmas of a local congregation. There is no prayer for all souls, since Protestants do not recognize the existence of purgatory. When the Church's calendar set the whole world's calendar, feast days were not just one day you would need time to prepare. Thus, not only was there All Hallows, the day of All Saints, but also All Hallows Eve, when the church was decorated and prepared. And over time, All Hallows Eve became Halloween. Preparations for the feast day may explain why Martin Luther chose to post his 95 Theses on October 31st, when he knew that A, purgatory would be on everyone's mind, and B, everyone would be at church the next day for All Saints festivities, and C, the notice he'd posted on the church door. But let's get into the spooky stuff. Commemorations of the dead have always had a tinge of eeriness in almost every culture, but some of the particularly ooky bits of Halloween bear a lot of resemblance to Irish celebrations at the end of harvest time that date to at least the 10th century. This was called Samhain, and at Samhain it was understood that the departed visited their earthly homes and that spirits or fairies might also journey through the land. So offerings were left outside to appease the spirits, bonfires kept evil at bay, poor children were encouraged to put on disguises and go from house to house in the village begging for treats. And in other parts of medieval Europe around the same time, children were encouraged to dress in black, like mourners, or to dress in homage to a particular saint, as they went door to door, begging for what were often called soul cakes in exchange for praying for the dead. Remember, All Saints is happening and leading us into All Souls, so these children essentially could be bribed to adding their prayers to those who were in purgatory. There were other celebrations throughout medieval Europe as well. Some people, especially in theatrical troupes, would dress up as corpses and enact a theatrical rendition of what was called the Danse Macabre, coming out of France, a remembrance that no matter one's station in life, all would eventually die. So there were all sorts of remembrances coming from pagan sources as well as coming from medieval Christian sources around this end of the fall harvest season, the sending into winter, and the remembrance of the dead. But American Puritans, unsurprisingly, were not interested in bringing these celebrations to what they called the New World, and Halloween goes generally unrecognized in colonized North America until significant Scottish and Irish immigration in the 19th century, and doesn't start taking place within American culture as a whole until the early 20th. Meanwhile, in Mexico, the integration or syncretism of the indigenous remembrance of the dead and the introduction of Catholicism results in the holiday Dia de los Muertos, a celebratory Day of the Dead in which families gather and tell stories and decorate the graves of those who have gone before them, often with candles, bright colors, and marigold flowers. But don't Christians hate Halloween? Almost every human and even pre-Homo sapien culture has some form of remembrance for the dead. A Christian one isn't that surprising, but what about Halloween? Don't we hate Halloween? No, many medieval theologians celebrated the festivities of All Hallows' Eve, recognizing that Christians needed a time to safely face their own death and mortality, and to face their fear of it with laughter, fun, and community. Contemporary Christians' objections that have risen, particularly with the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, are that Halloween celebrates paganism, magic, and the occult. And at the same time, many Christian churches have sought to reclaim Halloween as a church holiday rather than as a secular one. Many churches in recent years have hosted trunk or treat events. It's a tailgating event where cars are parked in the church parking lot and children can safely move from car to car and known family to known family, rather than going through neighborhoods where they might not know everyone who's answering the door and there might be high traffic, which would put them in danger. Many trunk or treat events can involve ornately decorated themed cars. And some churches, particularly in the non-denominational and Baptist traditions, will create hell houses that depict the violence and torture of hell with the intent to convert attendees to Christianity. It's their version of a haunted house, except instead of the intent being to terrify and simply elevate your stress hormones, it's to scare visitors into accepting Christ and therefore sparing themselves from the tortures of hell depicted in the hell house. So, what is the Christian response to the existence of Halloween, the secularization, the amount of candy, its potential pagan roots? First of all, we should know our history. We don't own Halloween, but we do own and have added to many beautiful parts of it. But we do that alongside pagan and secular traditions. We don't have an absolute claim on the holiday. 2, when we are celebrating and preparing for Halloween, remember that it is part of Hallowtide, that it is a time when we remember our dead. We remember and honor them. Some families and Christian communities choose to do that by lighting candles, perhaps speaking the names of those who have died out loud and telling their stories. Many will go to cemeteries and decorate or clean the gravestones of those who have gone before. 3, we can tell the stories of the saints, not just the canonized saints in the Catholic Church, but all of the beloved who have gone before us, not as a source of intercession, since Protestants have a bit of a reaction to that, but rather to call us to better action in the world. Let me give a couple examples of books that I like if I want to tell stories of the saints. There's this classic, because I will start with a properly canonized saint, St. George and the Dragon. I particularly like this one. It's illustrated by Trina Shart-Hyman, who was a very popular illustrator when I was a child. And it tells the story of a most likely somewhat legendary story of a canonized saint, St. George, who defeated a terrifying dragon. You might notice St. George's shield. This becomes a shield that symbolizes several different movements. He is recognized as a patron saint of several different communities, not limited to the armed forces, to the Church of England, and to those who battle injustice and evil in the world. If you've ever seen me in short sleeves, you might also recognize that George's shield is my arm tattoo. At the same time, we can remember to tell stories of the saints from our own times. Perhaps like using Jason Porath's book, Rejected Princesses, where he tells the story of many different women throughout the ages who fought for justice, for righteousness, for freedom for their people. Many of the people within these pages come from Christian tradition and can be celebrated as saints, as leaders in the faith who call us to better action in the world. And finally, in our celebration of Hallowtide, of Halloween, we remember death does not have the last word. We do not need to be afraid of death and what is coming for all of us. We can remember that death is not the end of our story, that God has wrapped us into a much larger and longer story of redemption for us individually and redemption for the whole world. So our meditation questions this evening. Halloween is going to look very different this year. What have you been planning to do to celebrate? And how do your plans reflect a spirit of love for our neighbors and for those who have died?